Well, here we are. This, we've invented this event because we've never done a memorial service here before. Um, and Colin was just fiddling with his Christmas present, which is this wonderful microphone, which will eventually go around the circle. But it's brand new to him, so we can forgive him for not knowing exactly. A little? Colin, can you turn it up a little?
Turn it up a little. I can turn it up a lot.
A little. Is that better? Yes. Good. So we're gathered here today because this is where Doug is. There's no doubt about that. I feel his presence here all the time when I'm here at home. I thought that an unfamiliar room in a church or an auditorium with just the right number of chairs was inappropriate for a man whose spirit is so strongly present in this place. And I think many of you have been here before and would agree with that. Our piper, Mark Little, hooray, Mark! He's set the tone for our celebration of life for Doug, and the poems I've chosen are also from Celtic sources. The first poem will be read by my nephew, David Johnson, who is the son of my late brother. And David is a pilot who serves as flight captain for American Airlines. He arrived from Miami yesterday, and he's been a huge help in completing the final preparation for this event. David.
This poem is titled Don't Be Too Sad by Anonymous. I've lived my life, I've tried my best. The memories I hold dear are experiences I have known of happiness and tears. The love of my family, the care of my friends, the good times I've shared right to the end. I've traveled life's byways, seen children grow up, experienced life's living, and drunk from love's cup. I leave you with memories, with thoughts of you all. I'm no longer with you, but your mind will recall the good times we shared, the laughter we had. Please cherish these memories and don't be too sad.
Thank you. Well, at a time like this, you want to make sure that everything you say is perfect. But after, working on this for many days, I realized it's not perfect. But I'll tell you a story. Out of the blue, on a winter night in February of 1971, I received a cold call from a gentleman, and he said, and just imagine his voice, "This is Douglas Hamilton, and I am a superannuated graduate student at Stanford University." I'll never forget that sentence as long as I live. And I had to go look up superannuated. I've known what it meant for a long time. So he went on to say that he often attended concerts, and he could see that I was frequently performing in the concerts, and he did a little research and found that I was also a student at Stanford, and he looked up in the student roster, and I'm sure it took all of the nerve he would ever have gotten together to make that call. So we talked for a long time, and we had lots of things in common, but especially Baroque music and classic cars and sports cars. And so then we got to the point of trying to pinpoint a date when we could get together. And I must have turned him down for the first 6 dates that he asked, and then I could hear that tone in his voice where he's saying, "This woman is not available." So, just that moment where you just feel the phone is about to go click, and I said, "Wait!" And that rest is history. At about 6 weeks later, we managed to schedule a first date. Just a few weeks before that fateful call, I had made the decision that whether I was married or single, I was definitely going to pursue my chosen career in music. And whoever I married would have to be totally on board with that decision. And now I really feel that the forces of the universe, I have one friend here that I'm always talking about the forces of the universe, got together when they had that intentional notion coming from me. They presented the right candidate. And he was the best thing that ever happened to me and the perfect partner for life. So we miss him very much. Page 2. There's not much wind today. I thought it would be windy. Doug was, in my opinion, a very religious person. He felt his life was full of rituals, from the daily 30-minute shower, and he's always standing under about 3 drops of water, but boy, it was 30 or 40 minutes. And he sometimes come bounding out and say, I've solved that thing I was working on, whatever problem it was. So that was definitely a moment of just being in yourself and meditating over a shower over your head. But it was quirky. Maybe this is a military thing, but he buttoned his shirt every single morning, 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6. And I only saw it a few times, and I thought, that's so weird, but maybe it's not. And but these are so dumb things to say. But let's see. Anyway, at the Scottish Games for many years, Doug insisted on being there for the final moments of the day. And anyone who's been to the Scottish Game, which is all the Morgan people here, know what that's like. But Doug was very, very proud of having served in the Navy. And at that ceremony at the end, the people who have served in the armed forces are asked to stand and be recognized. And then they play Amazing Grace. And I knew for him that was a religious moment, that was something that was very powerful, because you just know by a person's demeanor what that moment meant.
They play Amazing Grace on a parade with a parade of
Oh,
bagpipers,
yes, with
right?
700 bagpipers. Count them. Sushi nights were always one of our rituals, and I take every Saturday morning a drive out pick a car, pick a motorcycle. Everybody, all of you can pick a car. We've got 12, and 3 motorcycles. So anyway, he loved that. There was a thing in Los Altos, and then sushi was such a ritual for us on the weekend, one weekend night a week, and. Then when the pandemic came, see, there is a wind, we had to have the sushi come home, and it was even more of a ritual because we had to have the right plates, the right thing for the sake, the right thing. But his order was always 1 tuna, 1 yellowtail, 1, what's the other thing, salmon, and sake and a Sapporo, and it never, ever varied, and all cut in half. And again, just like Amazing Grace, you just tell from his whole demeanor that this is a moment that's very important, and it has to be played over and over. So one of our rituals that we shared after an event, we've never had an event like this, so I can't say like this, but where we've had people at our home, and finally the last guest goes out the door, and the door closes, and we turned around to each other in the hallway and had a great big hug. And it's not what you think, like, thank heavens they're all gone. It was that kind of, this is a great life hug. And tonight, when the last person goes out the door, I'm really going to miss Doug's embrace. I'm happy to introduce James, our eldest son, who lives in San Jose and works in high tech, and he's been a rock during these past few months. Doug died on March 7th. And for one thing, he comes at least once a week to start all the cars and take them for little rides and keep them viable as an option for a possible buyer, I guess. He's often accompanied by his delightful daughters, who are here somewhere, maybe upstairs with an iPad, I don't know. So, James,
Right here.
There you are. Oh, right in front of me. Pass the mic.
Well, let's see if I can actually get the words out here. I've been slaving over this. It feels like I'm writing a paper in 7th grade that I have to compose in my head, and everything has to be perfect when it hits the page, because I never figured out how to rewrite, and it's really hard to get anything down. And I can see my daughter Lily struggling with the same thing, and she knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, over the past few years, I ran into some difficulties that some of you know about, some of you don't. It's not important. That required that I live here at Bassett Lane for a few months. I didn't know at the time, none of us did, that this was a gift, because I got to be here for the last few good months of my dad's life. As an aside, it turns out that working remotely from the sunroom upstairs, in the middle of the oak canopy here, it's pretty nice, and it never gets old. This place, it works as advertised. So we fiddled with the cars, and we watched MSNBC, and Rachel Maddow was his favorite. And thank God Fox News didn't get their claws into him. And we had coffee and long dinners and discussed the obstacles that the high-speed rail project might encounter in a tunnel under the San Gabriel Mountains. His opinion was that there would be quite a few complex obstacles, and not surprisingly, I think it's just a collection of faults in a trench coat. Some of the highlights of my childhood were going with him on field trips from crumbling rock faces around Point Reyes to the revival of the French Corral gold mine in the early 80s. Got to see that go from a creek to a big hole to a really big hole. And that was kind of the end of it, but it was neat seeing an active gold mine. Where was I? Complete with, and in the early stages of that, we got to explore some abandoned tunnels in the mountain with no cell phones, by the way. Just pitch dark tunnels with water running through them and a couple of flashlights, and me and him wading through the water. And I was, 10? We went to hydraulic mining sites in Cisco Grove off of Highway 80. A lot of mining stuff that I did with him. And finally, a really epic drive from here to Montana by way of Yellowstone to deliver a pair of Toyota trucks to his company and office in Butte. And from him, I learned how to spot the shiny glaciation marks on the granite in the high Sierras, and how cyanide and mercury are used in gold mining, and how to rebuild the fuel pump in a Porsche 356. Turns out the answer to the last one is you open the box with the parts, and you start feeling around until you've got the fuel pump off, and then you put the stuff in that looks right, and then it works by some miracle, and 30 years later it still does. And that's all I have written here. Of course I'm going to lose it here, but, in sum, I learned from this experience that I love my dad, and I always will, and I always did. And that's all I've got. And here's Colin.
I have to introduce Colin. Thank you, James. I love you. Colin is our family member, our child who's decided to carry on in the musical tradition as a jazz pianist and a singer. He plays jazz violin and Baroque violin and guitar, and he's just recently decided to take up the cello. Why not? He's a new father. He has his little baby, Emma, is here somewhere. And that's quite an adventure for Colin and his lovely wife, Sahar. Where is Sahar? There, wave your arm. There. And is Emma there? Oh, Emma's being very good. Doug, let's see, where are we going? He loved talking to Sahar. And Sahar is the only one in the family who has been visited by Doug in her dreams. I think he's trying to make sure that she understands the geological significance of rock shattering that can occur from moderate or even low-level earthquakes as it pertains to tunnel construction for high-speed rail. I doubt if it was merely platitudes. Colin.
Merely platitudes, my God. Oops. Excuse me while I wrestle with the technology here. Nope, that's the B of A app. Get out of there. Okay. There we go. Well, before I get started in earnest, I'd like to give a heartfelt thanks to my late father for sharing a compatible waist size. Because these are really great pants I'm wearing here. So, and I do a lot of performing, and I'm like always looking at good clothes to perform in, and so these pants I think do the job, at least especially for today. Anyway.
Did you get married in those pants?
Oh, did I get married in these pants? No.
Did he?
Did he get married? No. That was another thing actually I was thinking of bringing up, is that like he had the most killer suit that I don't think I'd ever like looked closely at before in the closet. As Mom was clearing out the closet, and my God, that was such a nice suit. I wish but my lower half seems to be compatible with the Hamliton side, and but my upper half is more of a Johnson side, so that didn't really we didn't really have the same shirt size or coat size, I guess, most importantly. So anyway, it's great to see many of you here today. It serves as a poignant reminder of how many people Dad touched. And we're truly grateful. You could all be here today to remember him. So Dad made an impression on most, if not all of us here today, through his many qualities that made him stand out. His eloquent speaking style, his vast knowledge of many things with an uncanny ability to expound at length and minute detail, his college lecture style dinner table stories told in excruciating detail, complete with every possible tangents and footnotes which themselves could go on for an evening. His welcoming charm with special attention to making sure everyone's wine glass was topped up. His blunt sense of humor with a special talent for poking fun at anything from the ineffectual local police force to political and governmental corruption to earthly peoples and nations that just can't seem to get along. I could go on, but those things are self-evident, and I'm sure will be fondly discussed in other remembrances presented today. What I'd like to do instead is convey something of what it was to be the son of Douglas Hamilton by sharing a few remembrances, each of which I've given a title. And the first is called Last Ride in the SS for a While. One of my early memories of Dad was of a moment at Stanford Children's Hospital while I endured a lengthy hospitalization of a few weeks for complications stemming from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis between ages 3 and 4. I had my 4th birthday in the hospital. Dad showed up at the hospital one day in his 1937 Jaguar SS100 Roadster, still in its scruffy, dull, patchy primer coat, which would remain on it for nearly 40 years hence before finally receiving the proper paint job it now boasts. What better way, after all, to cheer up a young, sick boy than to take him on a ride in a classic sports car Not just any sports car, mind you, but a particular English specimen of a car that is legendary in every respect, from its old world stylings and go-kart layout to the incredible noise of the motor to its finer distinctions, including that only 300 of them were made. I remember cruising around the hospital parking lot a little before arriving at a point in which the car needed to be restarted. Dad invited me to have the honors. It had a push-button start, you see, thereby increasing the fun factor exponentially. And whether the car simply died as we were coasting or whether Dad stopped and turned off the motor intentionally so that I could restart it, we'll never know. What was certain, however, was the enormous backfire-like explosion following my pressing of the start button and Dad's reply, which was, "There." And the car would remain out of service for roughly six years after that. Dad was a geology guy, a DIY guy, and, as we all know, a car guy to the core. Cars were central to the family picture, as it were, but despite the disturbing number of them, Dad refused to be thought of as a collector. "I merely accumulate them," he would say. Though perhaps not a bona fide Anglophile, Dad certainly fell on the Anglophile spectrum, resulting in owning a number of classic English cars, notably the two prizes of the fleet, a 37 SS 100 and a 1956 Jaguar XK140, each affectionately nicknamed in a parlance readily understandable to young James and I as the old Jaguar and the new Jaguar, respectively. Both Jags held garage status once the garage was built in the late 70s. And the garage is, I guess, the long part of the L in that structure there. And both of the Jags and more are here, and everyone is welcome to check them out if you haven't done so already. So, as soon as everybody is dismissed, then you could go check out some cars. No more fear of kidnappers. When I was in second or third grade, I developed an acute phobia of being kidnapped, which started after seeing an investigative piece on television about kidnappings. One day, while riding my bike to school, and these were the days when 8-year-olds commonly rode their bikes places unsupervised, I became convinced a black sedan was following me. Bad guys, it was once said by a friend, commonly drove black cars. I made a right turn onto the road where the school was, and as did the black sedan. Terrified, I pedaled as fast as I could for the quarter-mile stretch before arriving at the safety of the school, where I frantically entered the secretary's office, saying I thought I'd been followed. "I'll call the police right now," the secretary said. An officer arrived shortly, the same officer, incidentally, who had given a talk to my class about general safety and police work the year before, Officer Grasty, if I recall, and talked to me about what had happened. He was sympathetic and reassuring and said he'd drive around and see if he saw anyone suspicious. I didn't ride my bike to school anymore for the rest of the school year. I was paralyzed by fear of being kidnapped for a good year. I wouldn't go anywhere alone and was fearful even if trusted adults were around. This was a clinical grade phobia if there ever was one, and I probably could have used professional help. Near the beginning of the next school year, the question of whether I'd resume biking to school arose. Dad would sometimes take us on evening walks after dinner in those days, and it was on one of those walks that he gave me a reassuring talk about my kidnapping trip. He made a convincing case, convincing to me anyway, that it was unlikely anyone would ever kidnap me, and I didn't have to worry. Thereafter, as if the world had been declared safe, as if the world having been declared safe were a prophecy, my worry left me. I went back to riding to school, and things returned to normal. I could have gone to a psychiatrist for therapy and drugs, but a fatherly talk was all that was necessary, apparently. Don't hate. A young boy coming of age will at some point always say he hates someone or something. Children's emotions can get raw, to be sure. Dad always said not to hate whenever he heard me say I hate someone, as if hating were a choice. It's not good to hate, he would say. To him it was a choice, or at least he thought one could curtail the impulse. He hadn't been the victim of hate, say, like, say, someone from a marginalized group had, but he knew of hate's effects through his education. Many of his famous dinner table lectures centered on gruesome political figures in the Middle East and elsewhere who had orchestrated massacres and other crimes against people they didn't like. What if fathers of some of those tyrants had told them not to hate? Dad may have wondered. As I've reflected on this advice through the years, I've come to see it largely as a choice, as I think he did, and I think I've been better off as a result. And if Dad's advice about hating prevented one less person from hating, in the form of me, then the world has been better off. A non-maintainer. Dad was in many ways a non-interventionist. He would do the minimum amount to keep something going. For example, he would water the yard and plants and mow the lawn, but little else. Affluent homeowners nearby clearly hired professionals who kept their property on a maintenance schedule, whereas we let the yard go au naturel. He didn't see the point in paying professionals to manicure the setting when he actually preferred letting things run wild. It was the same with cars, especially his daily drivers. He always changed the oil on schedule, and that was about it. Cars went to the mechanic only if something broke. The swimming pool in the back took an odder course. The pool was maintained, but only during the warm months. In the cold season, the pool was left to become an opaque, dark green soup of possibly toxic algae before being emptied and refilled sometime in early summer. The pumping out of the pool would be followed by laboriously scooping out the muck and scrubbing down the ancient, worn, white, dangerously coarse surface in preparation for refilling it. Of course, the pool lying empty for however many weeks invited all kinds of fun, including using it as a mini skate park. Life just wouldn't have been the same had there been a pool guy that came around every few weeks and made everything perfect. For better or for worse, Dad's approach manifested in other areas besides property and cars. Dad had 3 degrees from Stanford, but he never was going to helicopter parent James or I into matching that. I was once sanctioned in high school when my grades flirted with a D average in some subjects, while other parents intervened if their kid brought home so much as a B. Taking all this to its logical conclusion, perhaps Dad preferred an underachieving son just as he relished spring blossoms on unrestrained ivy. But that's not exactly so. To be fair, he liked it when we got good grades. He just wasn't going to be forceful. And I did make it through college, established a still uneven but interesting hodgepodge of a career in show business, and found myself a wonderful wife with whom I now have a wonderful new daughter. So take that, Tiger moms and dads. The lesson here, of course, with the possible exception of the swimming pool example, is that too much fussing over people and things is pointless. All you really need to do is take care of the broad strokes, and the rest will take care of itself. The cars, after all, mostly reached high mileage, and I made my way eventually. But here we arrive at the ultimate example of a product of such proudly held principles, the man himself. Dad maintained himself as he did the cars. He stayed away from smoking, hard drinking, and using substances, figuring that anything supposedly life-extending beyond those basic things probably wouldn't make much difference. He proudly never exercised for exercise's sake, though did a fair number of things in which one receives exercise by doing them. He ate pretty much whatever he wanted, though he was lucky to have had a wife who fed him things that were probably good for him that he might otherwise not have chosen to eat. He had few medical problems prior to around age 80. His medical issues stayed largely between he and his doctors, so there are things we'll never know about his medical picture, including what he did or didn't do about prevention and screening. We suspect that, as with his cars, much of the program with his doctors centered around treating things that went wrong as opposed to prevention. In other words, there probably wasn't much of a program. Screening for prostate cancer, to which Dad ultimately succumbed, involves a simple blood test called a PSA test. We don't think he ever had one. Whether it would have made any difference if he had had one, we'll never know. Nevertheless, while it's true he did not live to be 110, he did make it to 88, which is still a pretty good run. And finally, music lover. Among those Familiar with our family, some might assume my development as a music professional came chiefly from my mother's influence. But Dad's contribution in this regard was substantial. Dad was equally a music lover as Mom was and is a music expert. Growing up, records would be played, vinyl, that is, by Dad, on the living room hi-fi well into the evening, almost daily, and I would hear them in my room at night. Before hitting puberty, I had heard more Bach cantatas, Handel oratorios, Mozart and Haydn masses, Vivaldi and Telemann than most people hear in a lifetime. Mom rarely listened to music. She was too busy making it. Besides attending Mom's concert, trumpet practice from a distant room with the door closed was often what was heard of her. Memorable and important for the developing psyche, to be sure, but not the same ear candy as Dad's music emanations. My teenage trip down the rabbit hole of rock and jazz guitar might have indicated that my passions would be forever bound to screaming fast guitar licks and virtuosic jazz, but the expansion of my horizons in college would drive me back to the stuff Dad listened to back at home. Scientists know now that music activates pleasure centers in the brain. Watching Dad listen to a particular aria from Bach's B minor Mass or Handel's Messiah would seem to confirm this. He could be a sight to behold at a concert, eyes closed with total focus, head moving with the pulse of the music, enjoyment emanating from every pore. Dad will be missed and never forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I love you too.
I love you.
Colin, at about the age of 3, began to listen to was it Vivaldi, Triomphans, Judita Triomphans, big, massive oratorio.
One particular track on it.
One particular track, he wore out the first track. He listened to it day after day after day, hour after hour. And so that whole set of lovely LP records is sort of ruined by the first track. It's just a ghost of its former self. I must introduce my friend Margaret, Dr. Margaret. Well, she's a very dear friend who was my doctor at Stanford, a health clinic. We met in my very earliest days as a Stanford graduate student in 1969 when I had a medical issue. We were near the same age, and she was interested in my music career and had talked about some things. And when she learned I was planning to marry Douglas, she discovered that he had also been her patient. So since that time, our friendship has developed into a feeling of being family. The evening that Doug passed away, Margaret was there in a flash to support me in that dreadful moment. She's a wonderful friend.
I'd like to welcome Margaret Deansley Ziegler.
What a lovely introduction. I need to keep my wits about me, as this is very special. Because, of course, I'm a widow also, and Joyce has already tipped you off to the first page of the script that I decided that I would use rather than lose my way as I chatted with you. I'm Margaret, and I've known Douglas before Joyce did, I think. I had an office on the Stanford campus where I met him when he was a graduate student. He was at least several months later when he first met Joyce, and months after that I discovered that the man she was going to marry was, in fact, Douglas Hamliton. Joyce and I have been intimate friends, as you can figure, ever since. That comes to about 54 years, as I lived in the neighborhood just down the street. I want to tell you a story about Douglas. It's hard to tell you which story to pick because I have 50 years worth of stories. Only one. But there was a night when Joyce and Douglas were still living up at La Honda, and she suggested that she and I go to a piano recital on the Stanford campus. We did. We were both childless at that time. We did, and leaving the campus, We contacted Douglas, who was in an office down on the flats, and said that there would be tea and brownies at my house over there, just 6 or 8 doors from here, before the two of them drove up the hill together. We gathered in my living room. I need to let you know that my late husband was a pediatrician for you to follow this story. We sat visiting, drinking tea, and sharing a pan of Sara Lee brownies. Maybe you've had one of those. Each one really equals an extreme chocolate bar. The pan of brownies sat in front of Douglas, and he had many. Joyce sat on a chaise with her feet up. My husband, the doctor, and I on other living room chairs. Joyce was fidgety. Suddenly she sprang up and headed for my lavatory. My husband turned to me and said, "It's every 7 minutes. She better get going." Ever the physician, he had been timing her fidgets. Off they went to the Stanford Hospital, arriving at 10:55 p.m. in the parking lot of the emergency room. In went Douglas to get a wheelchair for Joyce. He was greeted by a nurse who said, "Oh, well, if you could just wait in the car for 5 more minutes, you won't get charged for today." Doug was thrifty and went along with this plan. When 11 o'clock came, a wheelchair was garnered, and 15 minutes later, their son James was born. Doug and Joyce and Paul, my late husband, and I, and the 4 boys that we have between us, had so many times together over 50 years, always eating leftovers on the Friday after Thanksgiving, for example, visiting together in the Sierras, etc. It is said that if you need to know a man, you must look around him.
Mike, a little closer.
It is said that if you need to know a man, you must look around him. Surely this gathering of his friends and his associates, representing all the myriad interests we know Doug had as a brilliant, unique, and marvelous person. How lucky we are.
Thank you, Margaret. I love you too. Well, David Weissman is here by doing the video thing. I'm going to tell you about David. I never saw Doug at work, and that might seem odd. Not in his office or in the field, but from the photographs I've seen, Doug appears to be in a state of full engagement, filled with intention. In most other photos, he projects a vision of complete repose. And most of those pictures are taken in this yard, but everywhere with a glass of wine, relaxed, he was able to completely let go of whatever it was he did for work. Most of our time together, I'm reading this and it doesn't make sense. But David Weissman has worked with Doug for many years on issues concerning the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant near San Luis Obispo. David is the executive director of the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. He has many other interests, including classical music, photography, filmmaking, and he can tell you more about his work with Doug. But I must say, I looked at the Alliance's front page, and there's a fantastic article, which I think you wrote, didn't you? You probably, wonderful writing and wonderful information on how complicated the subject of nuclear regulatory and responsibility is. I'm very happy to introduce David. He was a marvelous friend of Doug's and colleague.
Thank you, Joyce. It was kind of a last minute that I was on the program. I was just coming to videotape things, and so kind of like Doug, I'm an analog guy. I think we had that in common, so I just scribbled things. I don't have an iPad or can't do what they all do where they read off of the phones. We had a lot of analog things. I think vinyl records, film photography, cars that had carburetors and not fuel injection, and things like that. So thank you, Joyce. And I'm at somewhat at a loss of words, although it seems like for all those dinners in here, I was like a regular chatty Cathy and like never shut up. But this is a little tougher. And I began to think how we got engaged with Doug. Doug, as some of you may know, had been involved with Pacific Gas and Electric on the geology around Diablo Canyon, starting in, I think he says, about 1971. And of course, the plant got built. I was not involved at all at the time. But then it came around the situation we're facing today, which was extending the life of the plant, and that would have been around 2009. And actually, I'm the legislative director, the executive director, Rochelle Becker, who had known Doug because they had been on the opposing group during all those years, said, you know, I'm wondering if Doug Hamilton would be willing to work with us, would be willing to consult with us, because you figure he's got to know where all the faults are buried. And indeed, you know, he did, but he hadn't worked with any of the opposition groups, so to speak. And so she said, why don't you get in touch with him, see if maybe he would. And I said, all right, I guess. And I had to look him up, and I got a phone number. And I called, because the other thing about Doug is never sends emails. None of our correspondence, there was no emails from him to us, only from us to him. It was always on the phone, which, as I'm now hearing from his sons, would be long conversations with minute detail. Luckily, I'm a Gabby phone person, so that actually works.
I think his emails.
Yes, he'd read them, and then he'd call me.
He couldn't type, so.
Oh, is that what it was?
Oh, well, I mean, that was
Couldn't
probably
type.
part of it, yeah.
We'll get to the handwriting, yes. His pharmacist doctor handwriting, which I would then have to decipher into the 20 and 30-page reports we would put out. But, and so I contacted him, and I guess I must have called him, because I went back and looked, knowing I would say something, to the earliest communication we have. It's dated January 19th, 2010, and it begins like, Dear Mr. Hamilton, thank you for taking the time to speak this morning. You are indeed correct. Barbara Byron and James Boyd are the go-to people you need to talk to at the Energy Commission. And it goes on to say, I'm attaching a document with my scribbled notes from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They may be short on exact details, but will give you an idea, hopefully, of the gist of the meeting. I appreciate your input to this process, and we look forward to meeting you when you return to San Luis Obispo to work on your historical book. Best regards, David Weissman. I don't know how it else happened. Then we met him at a outdoor cafe in North Beach. Somehow that would have been not spring of 2010. I had no idea who to expect or what. I was there with my boss, Rochelle Becker, and he comes walking in. I had no, in the brown leather bomber jacket with his motorcycle helmet that he had ridden to the meeting on his bike, and somehow we hit it off. I don't know. People said I was the old soul, and maybe he was the older soul than me, but we would then go to work on trying to stop Diablo Canyon. We were looking at the seismic issues very intently at the time, and he was invaluable with his encyclopedic knowledge for this. We would drive to many seismic conferences that were held, a whole slew of them. It was on one of those drives when I don't know how we were talking about dates and birthdays, and I mentioned, well, that my birthday was coming up. He said, well, when is that? And I said, July 12th. And he says, wait a minute, that's my birthday. So when the program says colleague and friend, you know, I don't know, like, colleagues started and then became friends. Maybe that's how that worked. And so for the next dozen years, we would work together. He provided invaluable evidence. His testimony was in our cases and into the record, and I think he wanted to make that record clear. He wanted to leave behind a record of the truth of the situation as he perceived it. PG&E had ignored him. We would later go to hearings where he was actually kind of mocked and ridiculed. We were at a famous hearing. Our attorney, John Giesman, is here today, where, one, they turned the mic off on him when he was continuing to speak because they don't want to hear what he has to say. There was another hearing we went to not far from here. It was a seismic conference where we come in, the three of us, hardly protest-looking types, and we're met at the door, saying, sorry, you'll have to leave. I think it was the first time in his life he'd ever been, I mean, as close to being arrested, I suppose, as he could ever have imagined, that they literally rounded us up at the door, you can't stay. He was shocked by this. And I think maybe he found it even a little bit exciting to be as close as possible, to be kicked out of. Whoa, could you imagine that? And so we took our disgruntlement and I believe then headed to the Fish House, which was his other favorite place to go and work off things like that. And so it went on for a decade, and then yes, to become, as I just switched from being a colleague to a friend, and just so welcomed in this household so often. We would sit very often at this table, covered with papers, documents. As I said, you know, I also learned from Doug, and now do use mechanical pencils. Like, I'd never been a mechanical pencil guy before, and now I realize, like, yeah, it's like click, click, he'd be click, click with the mechanical pencils. But then, part of the challenge was I didn't know he couldn't type, so thank you for letting me know that. Because I would get everything was written on yellow legal pads with a mechanical pencil in what looked like doctor's prescription pad English.
I mean,
And
it was like really elegant handwriting, but not particularly legible.
right. And so a lot of my job involves slowly and methodically learning the particularities of his thing and then he was very pleased that I could transcribe them because he'd apparently been paying some other person to do this in the interim. And he was much more pleased with the accuracy of my transcription work. He also spoke scientific German, which was interesting, and he could read Japanese kanji script. But his own handwriting, absolutely illegible. And to conclude, say that I think he began to work with it at an age when most people would clearly be retired and not want to go on. I really think he had that burning desire. There was a truth buried, if you will, in the earth that he wanted to make clear and a record that he wanted to leave behind. And it was an honor for us to have that decade or dozen years to work with him. And I'd like to be able to say we won. We almost did. And he was certainly alive to know when we negotiated the deal to close down the Diablo Canyon reactor. Sadly, we're having to fight that all over again today. But he was certainly there. I remember, with the Public Utilities Commission, you mentioned the car thing. It was always a debate, like, which car were we going to take to the hearings? And there was a variety. There was a BMW wagon. There was a Mercedes wagon. There was the GMC Jimmy. For some reason, he was favoring the Mercedes wagon that morning. Hearing begins at 9. You all know what the traffic is like going up here, and we got to get to Van Ness. And the Mercedes is not behaving like it is the transmission, and he knows it's the transmission, and it should have been taken care of. I mean, I'm hearing things now that now suddenly makes sense to me what you're all saying here. And we make it to the corner, and he's very careful to drive so we don't get a speeding ticket past the school. He'd let me know when you're driving here where all the speed traps are. But we're coming to the on-ramp to the 101, and it's bucking. And he's to give it a little gas, and he like jiggles, jiggle, jiggle. And then we get there, and he's like, Mr. Weissman, I think we're going to have to turn around and go back. And he pulls the left lane kind of U-y on the thing and nurses the car back, and we switch to the BMW, which thankfully was working a little bit better that morning. And I don't know how it was, because as our attorney would know, he is never late and always early. And I'm looking at my watch, and sweat is breaking out. And, he had a somewhat heavy foot, but very cautious and very careful. And I don't know how it happened that morning, but Providence was there, and we arrived exactly on time. Car problems and all. So anyway, we are grateful. The Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility was grateful for Doug's work. I'm grateful for the company that went beyond just realizing we had the same birthday, and the many long phone conversations that we've had. And for the family being so welcoming and embracing for us as well. So I thank you for this small opportunity. But just, leave that statement. He never stopped working, and he never stopped believing in the truth of the science of what he was working on, right up there, almost till the very end. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I told him the other day that I thought he was like a younger brother to Doug. And he said, gee, I kind of saw Doug as a father figure. We love having you in our family, and thank you for your kind words. The Morgan Club is going to be represented by Jim Taylor. Jim and his wife Ellen Jo, who are seated here, arrived in this part of California when Ellen Jo became, tell me if I got this right, head of the microbiology department? The head of the labs, and she's traveled all over the world helping countries that have difficulty with setting up labs to set up labs, and they became very, very good friends, and whenever they were in town together, we were having dinner and getting together. And Jim is going to say a few words. We've enjoyed their friendship and being in the club with them for many years. Jim? Jim took a terrible fall about 10 days ago. Anybody else done that recently? So,
I'm ready.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Joyce. And hello out there, everyone. We've already talked a lot about, we've already talked about Doug's interest in cars, and I'm afraid that's pretty much my flat spot, so I'll dig a little deeper on that one. But Doug and I met in 1997, just about the time Ellen was coming up, and he had just bought or was in the stage of buying his first Morgan at that time, Morgan automobile. And he and I met up at a meet, and since my wife and I were planning to come up, I was interested in joining the club up here, and Doug had not joined the club at that point, so we joined the club at the same time. So not only is Doug my oldest friend here on the peninsula, but he is also my longest time friend in the Morgan Club up here as well. Everything that has been said so far today, I'd really love to repeat, but so I'll make my remarks very brief. I'll endorse just about everything that has been said so far. I don't know much about geology. Doug and I had interesting conversations about geology, and he and I had planned a Morgan tour to, by the way, Doug did plan a number of day drives for the club that included, I think a number of them were called Mine and Wine, given Doug's interest in wine and his knowledge of local geology, why we would be off to visit a mine of some kind or some kind of geological feature. We visited the Devil's Slide area while he was still doing the geology for the tunnel that was eventually built and was described in the notes that you have. But so I did learn a great deal about geology with him, but we had planned for a number of years to visit both the Pinnacles, which is a geological formation, the national park now, I understand, and the Neenach Volcanics, which is the other half of that rock formation, but 200 some odd miles further south in Southern California. And so that all occurred just before, during, and after COVID. So there wasn't any tour to really be done, but Doug and I got together a great deal to plan that trip. And he actually did prepare a full set of notes describing what we would see on the road in terms of following the San Andreas Fault from the Pinnacles to Neenach. Those notes were written in the same handwriting that has been described, but he was really a wonderful friend, and that long-term planning process was something that I don't think I'll ever forget. He was too ill to join us for the full drive. It was 4 days that we were on it, but he did show up at the Pinnacles to send us off that trip, and it was, I think, his last appearance at a club event. And it was really nice to have him there. He distributed his notes and some maps and talked about what we would see. Doug was very soft-spoken. I don't think, I mean, it's been described in many ways, but part of the characteristic was he was very soft-spoken, and you'd have to lean in often to hear what he had to say. And then usually what he had to say was very interesting or profound or amusing, but you needed to lean into it. Well, in Morgans, which are open cars, it's very difficult to carry on a conversation with anyone, even if they speak very loudly. So normally, if you were in the same car with Doug on a Morgan trip and it was involved an open car, not much conversation would take place. But Doug and I had several long road trips together, I mean, fairly long, down to Southern California and back several times. And those were perhaps my most valuable conversations with him, because if you're in a car with Doug for 7 hours or thereabouts, and the car is a closed car and air conditioned and quiet inside, then a lot gets talked about that you know, there's no place to go and nobody else to talk to but right here and now. And for me, that was probably the time that I enjoyed best with him. His interest in history is mentioned in these notes, and I also am interested in history, and so our conversations would often go far beyond the joint interest that we had in automobiles and covered history as well. And whenever he thought I could understand what he was talking about, we would talk about geology as well. So those times were wonderful for me, and I'll always remember them. Just one last note. George Tolworthy, a longtime member of the club here, plays a role in an event that Doug and I shared. Doug always had a beard and was pretty thin on top. And apparently to many people, Doug and I looked the same. We joined the club at the same time. And the club was fully formed at that time, so there were lots of relationships and people knew one another and everything was all cozy. And Doug and I think, confused people because they didn't know, was I Doug, was I Jim, who was that over there? And George christened us the twins, which of course didn't help things at all. And I just wanted to end my remarks by saying, those of you who ever saw Doug in the field would know that he loved that soft Tilly hat that he wore, and he wore it all the time when it was casual and he was outside. I just wanted to say that although I have a Tilly hat also, and I liked that hat, by the time I met Doug and we were twinned in this way, I made certain always to never wear that hat while we were sharing the same space. It would just have been too much. I'll always remember Doug. Doug is a wonderful friend, and Joyce and Doug and Ellen and I had such fine times together. And I just wanted to say I've lost a friend, and I'll remember him. That's how he stays alive for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We've loved knowing you and Ellen Joe. It's been a real treat. Thank you. I believe this is the moment there's a slight change in the program. Not a change, but a change of pace. Is Mark, is our...
He's back there.
He's back there. That's it. I see the arm wave. Doug loved the program, The Outlander, if you've watched that series, and he loved the music for that, and I think that's what we're going to hear next. I'm happy to introduce my niece, Nancy Vitaco, daughter of my older sister, who is now in memory care. Nancy's traveled from Chicago to be here today. She works in the area of child and family therapy. She's arrived late last night, and she's been wonderfully helpful all morning. I don't think she realized that she was taking on such a big job, but to help put everything together for today. She's going to read the next poem.
This is called Death is Nothing at All by Henry Scott Holland. Death is nothing at all. I've only slipped away into the next room. I am I and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way, which you always used. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without affect, without the trace of a shadow on it. Life means all that it ever meant.
I love it that Nancy could come today. We have family all around. Not everybody can just jump a plane and come, and it's great to have you here. Colin is going to be the master of ceremonies here, while if there's someone who would like to say anything into the microphone, he can move around through the crowd. So please raise your hand and he will come towards you with the sound system.
Loved everyone's remarks. It's just amazing. Dick Tuttle. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Just a little vignette for you about the chutzpah that Doug had. This involves his engagement with the Devil's Slide Tunnel. At some juncture, he decided he needs some rock samples off the face of Devil's Slide Cliff. And he did his homework. He went to the Highway Patrol, got a special parking permit to park his car on the Highway 1 right adjacent to the cliff. He drove over, tied a proper rope to the rear bumper, took his geologist pickaxe and a sample bag and rappelled down the cliff towards the Pacific Ocean. And he was chipping away down there, and after a while he started hearing something. He looked up and it was somebody with a bullhorn up at the highway, demanding that he come up immediately. It was the San Mateo County Sheriffs, and quite a few of them, in fact. And so he clambered back up the rope, and they were eager to arrest him. He said, "Well, I got permission from the Highway Patrol." He said, "That permission is no good. This is covered by the San Mateo County." But he finally assuaged them, talked them out of it, telling who he was and what he was doing there. And they decided not to haul him in if he promised never to go rappelling down Devil's Slide Cliff alone again. He was in his 70s, his mid-70s by then.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I've never heard that one before.
In the back.
That's Greta.
Just to continue on the Devil's Slide bent for a minute, that was really my connection with Doug, because Joyce and I have a musical connection, and I've had the pleasure of coming here to play with her in the studio. But there were times afterward, of course, where we'd sit down, maybe we'd have lunch together, whatever, and Doug would always say, "So, how's our tunnel?" And he would show me rock samples from there, and he had a core from the mountain that he liked to show off. But he would talk to me as though I understood everything he was talking about, and I would be rapt. I learned so much from him just from that. And he would wax prosaic almost about it. So it was a project that he really, really enjoyed. And I liked that connection that we had. So I appreciate being here today, getting to hear all these other wonderful facets about a man that I didn't know well enough.
Michael Dukes.
Yeah, I met Douglas, or Douglas met me first at the Palo Alto rail station. I'd come here from New York, originally from England, and looking around for a job, went into the Yellow Pages and looked for geotechnical consultants. I did geotechnical engineering in college, and lit upon Earth Sciences Associates and sent them a handwritten resume, and because in England you don't learn to type. And so I was invited down for an interview, and Douglas met me at the station in his white Dodge Dart station wagon, because Earth Sciences had Dodge Darts slant six engines because they were reliable, and caused me to buy one as well, actually two. So I worked there. So I was subsequently hired, and I was over on Cambridge Avenue. There was a lab there, and Douglas would come over regularly because on California Avenue was a hamburger place called Kirk's, and Douglas went to Kirk's all the time. And I think one of the last meals I had with Douglas was at Kirk's here at Town and Country. That was some years ago. I was then railroaded into going to Eureka, because this whole PG&E thing, working on nuclear power plants, Douglas, effectively Earth Sciences, Douglas was the consultant for PG&E, and they were going through the relicensing of the Humboldt Bay nuclear power plant. And so we were up there for weeks, months at a time. Two memories, specific memories there. One time signing into the Eureka Inn where we all stayed, I was struck by Douglas' handwriting, which, you know, to an English person who only did cursive writing, it was perfectly wonderful. I could not believe that anybody took the time to write like that, still, with an Osmoroid pen, an English pen, unbelievable. So the other thing, we go down and to eat. You have to eat in the evening, of course, and I guess the fish market, whatever, was Lazio's in Eureka, which I believe is now closed. But there's a fish restaurant on the bay, fabulous place, so great fun. A final bit, in 1992, I was separated from my then wife, and Douglas invited me, Joyce, to come for Thanksgiving, which I duly did, and met Lucinda Breed here. At Lucinda's wedding, some years later, I met my current wife, Belle. So this house has some significance in my life. And Douglas was always, and we met periodically, because my wife's a musician, Joyce, of course, going to PBO up in Berkeley, so we go out and eat quite regularly. Great fun. That's it. Lovely man.
Thank you, Michael. Josh. Officer Chilton.
So James and I met in 7th grade, though we didn't really become friends until high school. So when I was about 16, I came by the house. He and I were going to meet up, but he wasn't here yet. But Doug was here. I didn't know Doug very well at that time. But he invites me in the house, and we sit down in the living room, and he starts talking to me, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a 16-year-old boy, I don't want to talk to my friend's dad, who I don't even know. So I wish James will hurry up and get here. This is pre-cell phone time and stuff like that. So we start talking. I can't remember this part of the conversation, but somehow the discussion came about a sextant. And I had mentioned that I knew what a sextant was, but I had no idea how they really worked, or so on and so forth. So Doug gets up and says, wait here for a moment, goes into his office and brings out a sextant and the little book that goes with it, and starts teaching me how to use a sextant. So we end up almost exactly where Colin's standing right now, looking down the sextant and explaining the whole thing. And I was
just having a great time. It was, you know, I didn't know him yet and such. Remember, James comes back and opens up that door, and he has this look on his face like, what are you guys doing out here with a sextant? And I was actually a little disappointed now that he was here, because I was having fun learning to do the sextant, but we actually had somewhere to go and had to leave. But that's just a story that's not about cars or geology. But the type of guy that Doug was, you know, he doesn't just tell you something, he'd show you something. He was happy to share his knowledge, and he had quite a bit of it. And then in the 30 plus years after that, and the scores of dinners I've had with him, and trips to the historic car races and things like that, I got to know him a lot better. But that was kind of my first one-on-one introduction to Doug. It just shows a little bit about the man he was.
It's a sweet story, Josh. Thank you. Bueller.
Sure. I got one that came to mind a little while ago, and I'm a little fuzzy on this, if this one involved Josh or Frank Brown, but either one is very plausible. Sometime in the late 80s, the city of Menlo Park decided that they wanted to start enforcing the parking rules here. So no parking signs showed up in front of all the properties, all up and down Laurel. By the end, I forget how long it was there for, but it was there long enough to become an annoyance. And so at one Friday afternoon, my dad said, James, I'm going to put a hose at the base of the parking sign out there. Do you think that you and one of your friends could extract the sign from the ground? And the answer the next day was yes. We went out there and rocked it back and forth and pulled it out of the ground, and the city did not ever replace it. And the pieces of it are around here somewhere. You know, we cut up the pipe and did something with it, and you know, if you turn the other hijinks that my dad was peripherally part of was the +4 Morgan there. You'll notice it has the luggage rack, and the tire is mounted on it. It's a sort of slightly non-standard configuration, and that's because the sheet metal that has the cutout where the tire goes is filled in by a large piece of sheet metal, and if you turn it over, you're likely to see the reflective red paint of a stop sign from the back roads around Davis, California. So go check out the car, it's great. Anyone else?
I saw Paul's hand.
I just remember what a great trooper Doug was in the Morgan Club and always supporting it. And just about 2 years ago, Doug wasn't well. He was driving his Porsche with James was driving a Porsche with Doug in it, and my car conked out near Page Mill Road somewhere on a winding, twisty turn. And we all thought it was a fuel pump banging on it. But
Into the mic a little more.
Doug, pardon me?
Into the mic a little more.
Oh, right, okay.
There you go.
Sorry. Wow, no kidding. So Doug offered to go home, I think. Yes, he did go home. Offered and got some gas and brought it back to where my car was. Well, it turns out that wasn't a problem. So, but I really appreciate the effort. And that can he got, I don't know. It obviously was old. I don't know how old the gas was, but anyway, I got a flatbed home. But I really appreciate and remember Doug's great enthusiasm for the Morgan sports car. He will be missed, for sure. Thank you.
Pass it on.
Here you go.
don't worry. It's all good.
SM58 can take words.
Cha-cha-cha-cha. Okay, Evelyn. Evelyn,
How old the gas was.
you may know how old the gas was. Oh, okay. Tell us.
I'm a neighbor of the Hamiltons, and our sons all went to school. So I was asking my son, who's now at Purdue, what he remembers about Doug. And he said several things, and one of them was, and during that time that the fuel was hard to get, gas was hard to get, Doug stockpiled tons of it in the garage. So that may be where it came from.
That's right.
That was somewhere in the 1970s, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter.
It's a good story, but it's not.
That was the Middle East
Scary story.
oil embargo.
But the barrels
Where,
are open for inspection.
Yeah, I think we still have the I don't know, the like 20-gallon drums, of which there were several, and
55 gallons of leaded high test.
55 gallons of leaded high-test gasoline stockpiled here, just for the apocalypse.
Anybody else want to say a few things? I have a story. All this Morgan talk brings back the memorable one. We were on 280 in the green car out there. It wasn't a green at the time, but the car just stopped. Just plucka, 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 boom. That's it. You're off on the side of the road on 280. And he said, I think I know what it is. I think that the fuel line is blocked. And so I'm going to poke a flashlight into the gas tank, which is a cap on the top, and you look into it. And I lift up the front bonnet, and here, this hose is the gas line. And when I give you the signal, I want you to blow on that. And so I'm down on my knees off of 280, and he says, "Okay, blow." And I thought, it's a damn good idea. Good thing that he's married to a trumpet player. It was indeed. Whatever was blocking it came out. He plugged it back in, got in the car, and drove home. I hope our piper is ready. We're all learning day by day that Doug's life and the lives of most of us here have taken place in the best of times, and you've all been part of Doug's best of times, which has been great. I just look out and see so many dear friends, and so appreciative of your presence here today. Each one of you represents a thread in the fabric of Doug's life, and so please take time to share with each other how your lives became part of the same fabric. Thank you for being here on this special day to pay tribute to my beloved husband, father of our 2 sons, grandfather of 3 wonderful granddaughters. And to you, Douglas, wherever you are, may the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, the rains fall soft upon your fields until we meet again. May God hold you in the hollow of his hand. Amen. Amen.